There's a moment at a wedding reception, right after the toasts, right before the cake, where time feels like it stops. Everyone's eyes are on the newlyweds. Music hums low. Glasses glint. Laughter hangs in the air like it's been rehearsed. It's the part where the family smiles for the cameras, even if their lives are falling apart behind the scenes. That's exactly when mine did. I was standing awkwardly, heart pounding, in front of nearly 130 people. Not because I wanted to make a speech. I never do. But because someone across the room decided to treat me like I didn't belong. Like I wasn't worth the seat I was sitting in. And the worst part? My own wife sat there and let it happen. She didn't flinch. Didn't reach for my hand. Didn't say a word. She just sipped champagne with her perfect nails and kept smiling at the man who just humiliated me, my sister's new father-in-law. He made the kind of toast that cuts a man open slowly. Disguised as humor, dressed in faux elegance, but sharpened with intent. He didn't say my name, but he didn't have to. Everyone knew who he meant when he talked about people who don't understand legacy, or those who show up but never quite belong. Everyone looked at me when he mentioned some men who raised daughters like it's a favor, not a duty. Except, she wasn't my daughter. She was my sister, and I gave up everything for her. I kept quiet for 11 sentences, maybe 12, and then I stood, not to defend myself, not to argue, just to be seen, to be heard. And that's when Fallon, my wife of 9 years, turned to me with that half smile, leaned into the microphone, and laughed. "Oh, Curtis, just sit down. You're being dramatic again." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it echoed louder than any speech that night. I stood frozen. I couldn't even feel my knees. My wife had just laughed at me, in front of everyone. And for a moment, I genuinely wondered if I imagined it all. But then she turned back to Philip, the man who made the speech, and whispered something to him. He smiled. She touched his wrist, and something snapped in me. That's when I walked out. Not to sulk, not to catch my breath. I walked out because if I didn't, I was going to collapse in front of everyone, and I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. Outside, I paced the gravel path near the back of the venue. I stared at the string lights, listening to the clatter of silverware behind the doors. My hands shook. My lungs refused to cooperate. I thought, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I've always been the problem. Then I heard it. Her voice. Not from inside the hall, but behind me. Down the sidewalkway where the staff took their breaks. She was laughing again. And she wasn't alone. That's when I turned the corner and saw the man she had whispered to pressed far too close to her, her hand still resting on his wrist, not out of courtesy, but out of something far older, far more dangerous. She didn't see me. Not yet. But I saw everything. And in that moment, everything I had ignored for years slammed into me like a freight train. Her late nights, her secretive texts, her sudden friendship with the Whitmore family. That laugh she gave when I stood up, that wasn't surprise. That was relief. Because she thought I'd finally give up. She had no idea that I was just getting started. I should have stormed in, shouted, demanded an explanation like a real man, whatever that means. But instead, I did something worse. I stayed hidden. I froze behind the stone column at the edge of the patio, half shielded by ivy, close enough to hear their voices, too far away to be noticed. And I watched my wife flirt with another man like I didn't exist. Like I never did. Fallon leaned against the railing, heels off, her bare feet curled over the wood. She always hated heels. She only wore them when she wanted to impress someone. I used to think that someone was me. Now I wasn't so sure. Philip's son, Nolan, stood beside her with that smug, born-rich posture that makes every sentence sound like a challenge. He wasn't handsome, not in a conventional sense, but he had that thing people mistake for charm when someone's never been told no. She was laughing at something he said, one hand lazily brushing her hair over her shoulder like she used to do when we first started dating. I remember the first time she did that. We were in a cheap diner, and she flipped her hair and looked at me like I was the only man in the world. That same motion now looked like a performance, and I wasn't the audience. Nolan lit a cigarette. Fallon never liked smoking, but she leaned in anyway, close enough to inhale the secondhand poison. And then she said something that hit me harder than anything Philip said during his speech. He just doesn't push back. He folds. Like tissue. Always has. Nolan snorted. You knew that before you married him. Fallon shrugged. Yeah, I guess I thought he'd grow into someone else. My knees almost buckled. I wasn't supposed to hear that. And she wasn't supposed to say it, not in a whisper, not in a drunken confession, not ever. But she did. I wanted to burst out right then and there, to shout at them, to scream that I wasn't tissue, that I'd bent myself for her, not because I was weak, but because I loved her enough to put her first. I wanted to remind her who cleaned up after her father's funeral when she collapsed, who covered for her when she lost her job and lied to her parents, who paid for her therapy, her car repairs, her endless reinventions. But I didn't say anything. I stayed behind the wall, because something deeper than rage started growing in me. It wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. I had built my entire life around the idea that loyalty earned loyalty. That sacrifice meant something. But to her, I was just convenient, predictable, weak. I didn't go back inside the reception. I wandered down the gravel path to the back of the venue where the caterers were packing up. One of them offered me a bottle of water. I took it. I sat on an overturned crate and just stared at the ground for what felt like an hour. At some point, the music faded. People started leaving. I heard drunken laughter. Someone dropped a glass. But all I could think about was how many times Fallon had looked me in the eyes and told me she loved me, and how little those words must have meant if this was how easily she discarded me. When I finally returned to the hotel, our room was dimly lit. She had come back before me. The shower was running. Her dress was hanging neatly on the back of the bathroom door. Her phone was on the bed, unlocked. That never happened. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was survival. But I picked it up and opened her messages. There it was. A chat thread pinned to the top. Nolan Whitmore. No emojis. No flirty names. Just the name. Cold. Simple. And somehow, worse than any pet name would have been. I opened it. And what I saw made the rest of the night look like a warm-up. Dozens of messages. Photos. Hotel room numbers. Jokes about me. Complaints. Mockery. Even things I thought were intimate, sacred, my deepest insecurities, all shared like punchlines in some private comedy club. And then, at the very bottom, something I hadn't expected. A message from that same night. He actually stood up during the toast. And Nolan replied. Bet he thinks that makes him brave. I put the phone down like it was a weapon. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. My shoes still had dust from the venue. My fingers trembled. My ears rang. The shower turned off. I could hear her humming. She was in a good mood. Of course she was. She thought she won. But she didn't realize something had shifted. In me. Not rage. Not revenge. Just clarity. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a stage. And I had been the understudy all along. The water stopped. I heard her feet shuffle on the tile as she stepped out of the shower, humming softly to herself, the same melody she always used when she was in control, when she felt untouchable. I hadn't moved from the edge of the bed. Her phone was still unlocked beside me, glowing like a confession. My heart wasn't racing anymore. That was the strange part. It wasn't even broken. It was quiet, like something had finally gone still after years of thrashing. She came out wearing a towel, hair damp and twisted, mascara faintly smudged under her eyes. She looked surprised to see me there, like maybe she didn't expect me to return at all. Hey, she said casually, drying her arms. Where'd you go? You missed the sparkler send-off. Grace looked beautiful, didn't she? I just stared at her. She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. What's wrong? I didn't answer. That's when she noticed her phone. She froze. Only for a second, but I caught it. The smallest twitch in her expression, like someone walking into the wrong room and realizing they've been seen. Her recovery was fast. You went through my phone, she said, voice sharp now, defensive. Seriously, Curtis? That's a new low. Even for you. Even for me. Even for me. Like I was the one with something to answer for. I didn't respond right away. I think I was waiting to see what kind of performance she'd deliver. Would she try to deny it, deflect, or double down? She chose deflect. I don't even know what you think you saw, she muttered, grabbing the phone and locking it with a press. You always twist things. You overreact. God, you're exhausting sometimes. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Exhausting. That's what she called me. Not betrayed. Not hurt. Not heartbroken. Just exhausting. I saw everything, I finally said. My voice was low, flat, almost unfamiliar. The texts. The pictures. The jokes. The hotel nights. The way you called me a placeholder. She didn't flinch. She just wrapped the towel tighter around herself and sighed. Okay, she said, tilting her head. So what now? You want to fight? You want tears? You want me to say I'm sorry and cry into your lap while you play the noble wounded man? Come on, Curtis. Grow up. That was it. No apology. No remorse. Just this tired contempt, like I was embarrassing her by reacting at all. Like her betrayal was an inconvenience. I gave you everything, I whispered. Everything I had. She rolled her eyes. Yeah, that's kind of the problem. You gave too much. You smothered. You clung. You were always so small. I stood up slowly. You know, I said, I've spent our entire marriage thinking that if I just worked harder, if I just stayed quiet, if I just supported you enough, maybe one day you'd actually choose me. Not just settle for me. But I was wrong. She folded her arms. You always made it about you. No, I said. I made it about us. You just never came with me. She scoffed, but I wasn't listening anymore. Something inside me was moving, not violently, but firmly, finally. A weight shifting off my chest that had been there so long, I forgot what breathing without it felt like. I picked up my overnight bag, the one I'd barely unpacked. I walked to the door. Where are you going? She asked. I paused, and then for the first time in years, I told her the truth. Somewhere I can remember who I am. Then I walked out, down the hotel hallway, past the ice machine, past the front desk, where a bored clerk nodded as I passed, out into the cold night air that bit at my skin but felt clean, sharp, honest. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have a plan. But for the first time in forever, I wasn't following someone else's map. The next morning, she texted me 3 times. Then once more. Then she stopped. That afternoon, Grace called. And what she told me next about Nolan, about what she overheard before the wedding, turned everything I thought I knew upside down. Turns out Fallon hadn't just betrayed me. She had used me. And I wasn't the only one. The morning after I walked out, I found myself sitting in my car parked behind a 24-hour pharmacy with no real reason to be there. The engine was off, the windshield streaked with condensation, and a half-eaten gas station muffin sat in the passenger seat untouched. I hadn't slept. Not really. Just sat in that stiff hotel armchair until the room turned blue with dawn, and even the dust in the corners started to feel louder than Fallon's silence. My phone buzzed. It wasn't Fallon. Not this time. It was Grace. She never called me early. She never called me, period, unless it was important. The last time she called before noon was to tell me she got into college. That's how I knew, even before I answered, that something was wrong. Curtis, she said, the second I picked up. Are you okay? I wanted to lie. Say I was fine. Say I just needed air, needed coffee, needed time. But my throat felt thick, and the words wouldn't come. You left the reception, she continued, quieter now. Fallon said you weren't feeling well. I didn't say anything. Grace hesitated. I could hear her trying to figure out how to word whatever she was about to say. Then she asked, "Can I tell you something weird?" I said yes, even though I already felt the ground tilting beneath me. She lowered her voice, like someone might hear her even though she was probably alone. Last night, after you left, I went out to the garden with Mason's mom. I needed a breather. While we were out there, I heard someone talking. Behind the hedge near the patio. It was Nolan. And Fallon. I closed my eyes. She continued. I only heard a few words. But, Curtis, he said, he won't do anything. He never does. He's useful. That's all. My stomach dropped. I could feel every single beat of my pulse behind my eyes. And then Fallon said, Grace went on, she said, it's almost over anyway. I just need one more account in his name, and then we're done. The silence between us turned dense, heavy like molasses. I thought maybe I misheard it, she added quickly. Or maybe they were talking about someone else. I didn't want to believe it. But when you didn't come back inside. I'm glad you told me, I managed. But I wasn't glad. I was wrecked. I sat back, staring at the rearview mirror like it might show me a version of myself from before all of this. I remembered Fallon asking me a few weeks ago if I could co-sign something for her, some new creative project, she said. Just a short-term loan through your name. They trust your credit more than mine, she had laughed, curling up next to me like she still meant it. I signed the paperwork without reading it. Because that's what you do when you trust someone with your life. You don't assume they're sharpening the knife behind their smile. After I hung up with Grace, I drove straight to the bank. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, but I told the clerk I wanted to review all recent activity across my accounts. I expected to see something suspicious. But what I found, it wasn't suspicious, it was surgical. Over the past 9 months, Fallon had moved money between accounts I hadn't touched in years. She'd refinanced one of my old auto loans. She had access to my digital banking, my investment app, even my emergency fund. The names were all clean. The transactions spaced perfectly. Nothing screamed theft on the surface. But I knew my numbers, and they didn't add up. She had drained almost $18,000 total. I asked the bank manager to freeze everything. She asked why. I didn't explain. I just nodded, and she complied. I walked out of the bank like I'd just finished identifying a body. It was mine. By the time I returned to the hotel, Fallon was gone. Not just her clothes, everything. Her jewelry, her laptop, her cosmetics, even her toothbrush. The only thing left was the scarf she wore the night we first kissed, crumpled on the floor next to the bed like it had fallen and didn't matter enough to pick up. She hadn't run. She had prepared. She had waited for the wedding to be over, for the final moment where she could pretend everything was still intact. Let me play the fool one more time in a room full of people who thought we were happy, and then she left. And it hit me, truly hit me, that she never laughed at the toast because she was embarrassed. She laughed because she thought I was still beneath her, still the man who would endure, apologize, and make her tea in the morning like nothing happened. She didn't know I was already gone, and she definitely didn't know what I planned to do next. Because as much as I had tried to be soft, kind, understanding, there was a part of me she hadn't met yet. The part that finally, after years of patience, had learned how to stop folding. Fallon didn't just vanish, she evaporated. No texts, no calls, no digital footprint. Her social media went dark within hours. Credit cards dead. Her phone number? Disconnected. It was like she had been planning this exit for months, slowly sealing off all exits I might crawl through after her. But she made one mistake. Just one. And it was enough. When I returned to the apartment that afternoon, everything looked the same, but it felt different. There was no scent of her perfume lingering in the air. No stray bobby pin on the bathroom sink. The plants she insisted I water while she was too busy were all dry and leaning sideways, like even they'd given up pretending. The only thing she left behind was her old laptop, the one she used before she got her shiny new MacBook last Christmas. I knew it was password protected, but I also knew her well enough to guess what she'd use. She wasn't clever, just calculated. Her mother's birthday. For digits. It worked on the third try. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I found it quickly, an email chain with a subject line that made my stomach twist into knots. Whitmore Design plus campaign timeline. I opened the thread. The emails weren't about furniture or decor or anything to do with interior design like I assumed she was doing freelance work in. They were invoices, account routing numbers, marketing briefs, product rollout schedules. But here's the kicker, they weren't sent from her email. They were from mine. Or rather, from a clone of mine. A mirrored address one character off, created with a domain I never owned. She had been pretending to be me. For months. And she'd been billing a company under my name, using my social security number and credentials to funnel contracts through her own shell LLC. I stared at the screen for over 5 minutes, unable to process it. I'd been used as a human identity mask, while she raked in payments for work that, as far as I could tell, she never even completed. The invoices were templated, vague, and they all directed payment to an account I didn't recognize. But I recognized one of the names on the payment approvals, Nolan Whitmore. So this was more than betrayal. It was a scam, a full-blown operation, and I was the fall guy. Fallon didn't just emotionally manipulate me, she built a fraud campaign and wore my face to do it. I printed every document I could find. Then I checked my own emails. That's when I discovered she'd been forwarding messages from my actual inbox to her mirror account. Job offers, financial alerts, even login verifications. Everything she needed to impersonate me, she got right under my nose. I called my old friend Malcolm. He works in cybersecurity and owed me more than a few favors from back in the day. I asked him if he could trace the IPs behind those forwarded emails. He agreed, reluctantly. 30 minutes later, he called back. "Curtis," he said, "this trail's messier than I thought." She used a VPN for most of it, but there were a few slips. One of them's from a Wi-Fi network registered to Whitmore Creative. That ring any bells? It did. I remember the logo from a tote bag Fallon had once tossed on the couch without thinking a gift, she said. Some client swag. I hadn't thought twice about it. She's not just working with him, I said. She's embedded. Dude, Malcolm said flatly. They've been laundering money. Through you. If you don't go to the authorities now, this lands on your head. I hung up. That night, I drove 3 hours north to my cousin's cabin. No cell signal. No distractions. Just me, a stack of printouts, and a voice recorder. I documented everything. Every timeline. Every account. Every email. Every payment. Because I knew what Fallon was counting on, that I'd crumble, that I'd drown in humiliation, that I'd stay the quiet man, the soft-spoken shadow, the tissue she could fold one more time before tossing me away for good. But this time, I wasn't folding. I was documenting. I was preparing. And as the fire crackled beside me in the hearth, I realized something that shook me harder than even the betrayal. Fallon wasn't the mastermind. Nolan was. The emails hinted at more. At a larger plan. At someone else pulling strings. And Fallon? She was just another face in his rotation. A beautiful, intelligent, disposable partner in crime. Which meant if I wanted to survive this, if I wanted to stop being the joke in their secret conversations, I couldn't just expose her. I had to outplay them both. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat in that freezing cabin surrounded by printouts, voice memos, and half-scribbled notes on napkins, receipts, whatever I could find. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Fallon's face, not the version I'd memorized over the last decade, but the one from the wedding night. The smirk. The cold detachment. The way she leaned into Nolan like I was the waiter clearing plates instead of her husband. That image looped through my head like punishment. But I wasn't going to let it break me. Not anymore. I was done trying to understand her. I didn't need closure. I needed leverage. Malcolm called the next morning with another piece of the puzzle. I traced that Shell LLC Fallon was funneling money through, he said. Guess what address it's registered to? Don't say my apartment. Nope. Worse. It's under your sister's name. Grace. I stopped breathing for a second. What? I whispered. She's clean. I checked. She has no idea. But the documentation was filled out using her maiden name and a typo on the social. It was meant to fly under radar, just enough to make the dots connect to you if something blew up. So Fallon wasn't just ready to throw me under the bus. She had prepped a backup scapegoat. My sister. That's when it shifted. All the embarrassment I'd been drowning in evaporated. Shame turned into clarity. Fallon and Nolan didn't make a mistake. They built an insurance policy, and it had my name and Grace's face on it. I asked Malcolm to send me every file, every IP address, every digital breadcrumb. I needed to create a case so airtight that if either of them tried to run, they'd walk straight into a wall of evidence. And I wasn't going to the cops yet, not because I didn't trust the system, but because I knew Nolan was connected. His father, Philip Whitmore, wasn't just some pompous wedding toast villain. He sat on the board of 2 local banks and chaired a business ethics council. The hypocrisy would have been hilarious if it wasn't so vile. I needed more than a file folder. I needed a spectacle. And I knew just where it had to happen. Philip's charity gala was coming up. It was annual, massive, and Fallon had dragged me to it every year since we married. It was the only night of the year where everyone in Nolan's world gathered in one place to congratulate each other for existing. Fallon had RSVP'd months ago. She wouldn't miss it. And if she showed up with Nolan on her arm, all I had to do was watch the match hit the fuse. So I made a plan. First, I contacted Grace. I told her everything gently, but honestly. She cried. I did too. But she listened. She offered to help, to testify, to dig through anything that would support my case. She was the first person who made me feel like I wasn't crazy. Like I wasn't just spiraling. She believed me before she saw proof, and that alone changed something in me. She told me one other thing, though. Something small, but it lit up like a flare in my mind. I think Fallon kept a backup phone, she said. Remember when she came over for brunch last month and got a call on that old flip phone? She said it was for work, but she looked nervous. Weird. Said she left it at the office. Fallon never leaves anything anywhere. That woman used to track her lipstick inventory. I broke into our storage unit the next night. It wasn't even hard. She'd left the key in her old desk drawer. I found the backup phone in a fake makeup bag inside a broken suitcase I hadn't seen since 2018. It was off. Dead. I charged it. When it lit up, I felt sick. The messages on that phone were worse than anything I'd found on the laptop. Voice notes, screenshots, bank pins, audio of her and Nolan planning everything like it was some fun little side hustle. Laughing about my dead eyes, Fallon mocking the way I fold laundry, Nolan mocking the way I talk. Every part of my life turned into parody by people who had once eaten meals I cooked and slept under the roof I paid for. They called it the Patience Project. That was the name of the scheme. They thought it was funny. Because I was so patient, I wouldn't notice as they hollowed me out from the inside. They had no idea how patient I could really be. The gala was 6 days away. I spent every one of them building my presentation. I bought a suit. I practiced every word. I contacted a local reporter I used to work with years ago when I was freelancing tech reviews. Someone who owed me a favor. I sent her the package. I told her when to show up. I told her to wait for my cue. And then I waited. Because if they wanted a performance, they were about to get one. They built a story where I was the punchline. Now I was going to rewrite the ending. The evening of the gala arrived faster than I expected. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I buttoned my jacket in the bathroom mirror of a cheap motel 30 minutes outside the city. It wasn't nerves. Not really. It was something else. A kind of electric numbness, like I'd climbed too high and was only now realizing there was no railing behind me. But it was too late to climb down. I had my folder. I had the drive. I had everything lined up. I had called Grace that morning and told her not to come. I knew she wanted to, but I needed her name clean if things went sideways. She cried. I almost did too. The gala was held at the Whitmore Civic Hall downtown, a monstrous marble building with chandeliers that cost more than my car. Security was minimal, just enough to look professional. Fallon had RSVP'd weeks ago with both our names. I walked in 10 minutes before the formal introductions began. I wore a hat, kept my head low, avoided eye contact. I knew she wouldn't expect me there. She probably assumed I was holed up somewhere feeling sorry for myself. That was always her problem. She never imagined a version of me that fought back. Inside, everything sparkled. Waiters floated with trays of champagne. Couples in black and silver gowns took selfies under banners that read, Whitmore Foundation, Ethics Through Action. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. But I just moved along the edges like smoke. Then I saw her. Fallon. She was wearing the green dress she used to joke was too bold for polite company. Her hair was curled the way she always did when she wanted to appear soft, innocent, pure. She was standing near Nolan, who was drinking something amber out of a crystal glass and charming a trio of executives. Fallon laughed at something he said, her hand brushing his shoulder with a touch that was too natural, too rehearsed. I took my position near the back, by the AV booth. The man running the slides looked bored. I tapped him on the shoulder. Excuse me, I said, sliding him a white envelope. Inside was a crisp 100 and a printed set of instructions. He opened it, skimmed it, looked at me. Seriously? I nodded. At exactly 9:05. Hit the folder labeled Special Presentation. Just once. Don't ask questions. He hesitated, then shrugged and took the envelope. I left before he changed his mind. At 9:02, Philip Whitmore took the stage. His voice echoed through the hall like a sermon. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, we are honored to stand in a room full of people who represent integrity, leadership, and the belief that trust is the foundation of every successful community. The irony made my skin crawl. I checked my watch. 9:04. Fallon and Nolan were seated together at table 4, just left of center, the perfect view of the stage. She was sipping champagne, eyes glowing under the chandelier. She had no idea. 9:05. The lights dimmed for the scheduled slideshow, a montage of Whitmore's philanthropic work. But instead of the foundation's logo, a title card appeared. The Patience Project. And then it began. Clips of voice notes, Fallon's voice, laughing, Nolan's voice, bragging. Photos of bank documents, side-by-side comparisons of forged email headers. Screenshots from the flip phone. A timeline. Transactions. My name attached to every wire, every invoice, every signature. A spreadsheet scrolled up. The crowd went silent. Then a video clip. Fallon's voice. As long as he thinks I still love him, I can get away with anything. Then Nolan. Honestly, I feel kinda bad. But hey, free money's free money. If he's too dumb to notice, that's on him. And then my voice. From a video I recorded that morning. Standing in front of a blank wall, eyes tired but clear. My name is Curtis Rayner. For the last 9 months, I've been unknowingly used in a financial scam orchestrated by my wife, Fallon Rayner, and her partner, Nolan Whitmore. Everything you're about to see is true, verified, documented, and forwarded to the State Attorney General. This is not revenge. This is truth. Do what you will with it. I stepped into the back of the room just in time to see Fallon stand up so fast her chair screeched across the floor. Nolan's face had gone sheet white. Philip was frozen at the podium, mouth open. And then the press stepped forward. 2 reporters. Cameras out. Recording. I watched it all from the corner. No one saw me. Until Fallon turned and locked eyes with me. That moment, her expression, it didn't read shock. It read rage. I nodded. She took a step toward me, lips moving, but I walked past her, out through the service entrance. I didn't need to say anything. I already had. Back in the car, I sat in silence, heart pounding like I'd sprinted miles. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I felt clean. Empty, but clean. My phone buzzed. One message from Grace. They just escorted them out. Reporters are everywhere. You did it. And for once, I didn't feel like the man who always stayed silent. I felt like the man who finally stood up and let the world see what they'd done. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because exposing them was just part one. Now, I had to rebuild everything they tried to destroy. Fallon and Nolan were arrested 3 days later. Turns out, the gala wasn't just a social event. It was a fortress of witnesses, board members, and a half-dozen donors whose legal teams worked faster than most government agencies. Once the footage hit the press, everything unraveled. The Whitmore names stopped buying silence. Emails flooded into the local prosecutor's office. More victims came forward. Nolan had done this before. Different versions, same methods. Fallon was his longest-running partner. I gave the full file to the authorities. I cooperated with every question. I showed them the fake emails, the accounts, the forged invoices, the video clips, the messages. They called it one of the most neatly packaged whistleblower files they'd seen in years. I guess I'd learned something from all those years of folding laundry and paying bills on time. How to keep things in order. Fallon tried to message me from jail. Twice. Letters. The first one begged. The second one blamed. I didn't open either. I returned them both, unopened, marked not at this address. Because I wasn't. Not anymore. I moved out of the apartment 2 weeks after the gala. The couch, the bed, the silverware, I left all of it behind. I kept only what mattered. A stack of old photos of Grace and me, a chipped coffee mug from my mother's kitchen, and the scarf Fallon dropped the night she ran. I didn't keep it out of sentiment. I kept it as a reminder of how far someone will go when you don't know your own worth. Grace visited a lot after everything. We started cooking together again like we used to, laughing like we hadn't in years. It reminded me that the life I fought so hard to build wasn't a waste. It just needed new walls, better locks, and no room for people who treated love like leverage. I started seeing a therapist. I didn't think I needed one at first. But after the second session, I cried for 47 minutes without stopping. Not because of Fallon. Not because of Nolan. Because for the first time, someone asked me how I felt, and I didn't know how to answer. Turns out, I'd been holding my breath for over a decade. I exhaled in that room. And for the first time in forever, I could actually feel my lungs again. A few months later, I launched a small consulting business. Nothing big. Just honest work helping small nonprofits protect their data and digital security. Malcolm helped set it up. Grace built the website. I called it Second Wall, because sometimes the first one breaks, but you still get to build another. It's not flashy. I'm not rich. But I sleep at night. And I wake up not wondering where she is, or who she's with, or what she's lying about. I don't feel small anymore. Because I was never small. I was just quiet. And now? Now I speak up. To anyone reading this who feels like they're shrinking in their own home, you're not the problem. And you don't have to wait until someone breaks you to start building yourself. Fallon taught me a lot. But Grace reminded me of something even more important. You don't need someone to complete you. You just need someone to see you. And if no one does, then you be the one who looks in the mirror and finally says, I see you. I believe you. And I'm not folding anymore. Thanks for reading. I'm Curtis Rayner. And I'm still here. Whole. Honest. Free.